Hi, Kickin', how are you doing? I just realized I forgot to put on my tiara, so it's going to be a little lopsided, but there it is. Go ahead and switch over to this view. Let's see. Do we need to get it centered more? Maybe this? Yeah. There we go. How was your week? Are you looking forward to your weekend? No, it's Friday night for you. It's almost Saturday. Been good out for 8 hours with practicing on the skateboard. Oh yeah, that can really take it out of you. Do you fall down much, or have you gotten good enough where you're able to stay, do the tricks pretty well? Hey Diamond, how are you doing? Oh, for sure, yeah. I'm gonna sleep in tomorrow. I don't have anything on the books for anything I'm doing, and I am looking forward to it. Yeah, I haven't had like a fully full day off in quite a while, actually. When we found out that the person that at work who used to be the in charge person at the beginning of the week, yeah, finally, yes, I would have like gotten the other one replaced, but the last time I got the other one replaced, they replaced it with another one that ran for like a month, and then it just kind of went kaput. So hopefully, this is Logitech, so knock on wood, it's gonna work. And I've got a really nice look at my lovely. This is the Nano, if you can believe it. The Blue Yeti Nano. So far, the sound seems to be working, so I think it was just a matter of having not a very good mic. It worked in a pinch, but not quality. Oh no! You only fell twice. That's pretty good. Yeah. Ah, yeah, old boards. That's cool. Yeah, and one of the nice things about like learning on an old board is when you get a new one, even though you do have to break it in, get more familiar with it, uh, you'll be like, oh, this one doesn't have the little intricacies. Like I have to be a little more gentle on this side. Oh no. Nice. Was last week your Easter break, or was it next week? Because at least here, in the county where I live, some of the schools have Easter break, or now they call it spring break. Some schools have it the week before Easter. Others have it the week after Easter. So who knows? Sorry, I'm just smelling. Smells like somebody struck a match, so I'm really quickly going to check on something. I'll be right back. Yeah. Mystery solved. Ooh. Oh, 2 weeks off? That is sweet. No, no, the library did not catch on fire. Um, in the bookstore where I work, there have been a couple of people who have worked there. They don't work there anymore, but they used to pull the vacuum cord. Like, we'll say no, we can't use that. We'll say This is a vacuum cord. So they'll pull from back here, like imagine this is feet long, and just yank it out of the floor. And I've had to say, no, you can't do that because we work in kindling, and it is, you don't want sparks around paper because that could be very bad. Also, it's also very bad for the cord and for the tines, and altogether bad. Luckily, people don't really do it, but unfortunately it did lasting damage to the outlet. So now the cords don't really stay in very well. They kind of flop over. So you'll be vacuuming and all of a sudden it stops because the cord has fallen out of the thing, which is really frustrating. But, old buildings, you do what you can. Yeah, I know. Oh, well. We've found a way to make it work. Like, when you first, work there for the first couple of weeks and it happens and you're like, why is this happening? You just kind of get used to it. I've been there for 17 years and it's like, oh, yeah, it's, old buildings. They do that. Well, shall we begin? With the Secret of Chimneys. I had to do a little refresher before I put up my tweet about it, because I had totally forgotten what had happened right before, and then, well, where we left off, they had found somebody who had been snooping around, and it turns out he is somebody who is from the Sûreté of Paris. And he has come to investigate too, so it'll be interesting if it's somebody that we've met in any of the Poirot series. I actually kind of like it when they do that, like with the, I don't remember which book it was that wasn't in the Poirot series, but they had Detective Inspector Japp from the Scotland Yard in there, who has worked with Poirot a couple of times. It's like, hey, I love it when they do that, just returning characters. Alright, let's make Maestro disappear. Here we go. Chapter 19. Secret History. They all stared at the French detective, who smiled back at them. Yes, he said, it is true. There was a pause for a general readjusting of ideas. Then Virginia turned to Battle. Do you know what I think, Superintendent Battle? What do you think, Mrs. Revell? I think the time has come to enlighten us a little. To enlighten you? I don't quite understand, Mrs. Revell. Superintendent Battle, you understand perfectly. I dare say Mr. Lomax has hedged you about the recommendations of secrecy. George would, but surely it's better to tell us than have us stumbling on the secret all by ourselves, and perhaps doing untoward harm. Mr. Lemoine, don't you agree with me? Madame, I agree with you entirely. You can't go on keeping things dark forever, said Battle. I have told Mr. Lomax so. Mr. Eversley is Mr. Lomax's secretary. There's no objection to his knowing what there is to know. As for Mr. Cade, he's been brought into the thing willy-nilly, and I consider he's a right to know where he stands, but... Battle paused. I know, said Virginia. Women are so indiscreet. I've often heard George say so. Lemoine had been studying Virginia attentively. Now he turned to the Scotland Yard man. Did I hear you just now address Madame by the name of Revell? That is my name, said Virginia. Your husband was in the diplomatic service, was he not? And you were with him in Czechoslovakia, just before the assassination of the late King and Queen? Yes. Lemoine turned again. I think Madame has a right to hear this story. She is indirectly concerned. Moreover, his eyes twinkled a little, Madame's reputation for discretion stands very high in diplomatic circles. I'm glad they give me a good character, said Virginia, laughing, and I'm sure I'm not going to be left out of it. Oh, and I'm glad I'm not going to be left out of it. What about refreshments? Said Anthony. Where does the conference take place? Here? If you please, sir, said Anthony. I've a fancy for not leaving this room until morning. You'll see why when you've heard the story. Then I'll go and forage, said Anthony. Bill went with him, and they returned with a tray of glasses, siphons, and other necessities of life. The augmented syndicate established itself comfortably in the corner by the window, being grouped around a long oak table. It's understood, of course, said Battle, that anything that's said here is said in strict confidence. There must be no leakage. I've always felt it would come out one of these days. Gentlemen like Mr. Lomax, who want everything hushed up, take bigger risks than they think. The start of this business was just over 7 years ago. There was a lot of what they call reconstruction going on, especially in the Near East. There was a good deal going on in England, strictly on the QT, with that old gentleman, Count Stiltich, pulling the strings. All the Balkan states were interested parties, and there were a lot of royal personages in England just then. I'm not going into details, but something disappeared. Disappeared in a way that seemed incredible, unless you admitted two things: that the thief was a royal personage, and that at the same time it was the work of a high-class professional. Monsieur Lemoine here will tell you how that might be. The Frenchman bowed courteously and took up the tale. It is possible that you in England may not even have heard of our famous and fantastic King Victor. What his real name is, no one knows, but he is a man of singular courage and daring, one who speaks 5 languages, and is unequalled in the art of disguise. Though his father is known to have been either English or Irish, he himself has worked chiefly in Paris. It was there, nearly 8 years ago, that he was carrying out a daring series of robberies and living under the name of Captain O'Neill. A faint exclamation escaped Virginia. Monsieur Lemoine darted a keen glance at her. I think I understand what agitates Madame. You will see in a minute. Now we of the Sûreté had our suspicions that this Captain O'Neill was none other than King Victor, but we could not obtain the necessary proof. There was also in Paris in the time a clever young actress, Angèle Maury, of the Folies Bergeret. For some time we had suspected that he was associated with the operations of King Victor, but again no proof was forthcoming. About that time, Paris was preparing for the visit of the young King Nicholas IV of Czechoslovakia. At the Sûreté we were given special instructions as to the course to be adopted to ensure the safety of His Majesty. In particular, we were warned to superintend the activities of a certain revolutionary organization which called itself the Comrades of the Red Hand. It is fairly certain now that the comrades approached Angèle Maury and offered her a huge sum if she would aid them in their plans. Her part was to infatuate the young king and decoy him to some spot agreed upon with them. Angèle Maury accepted the bribe and promised to perform her part. But the young lady was cleverer and more ambitious than her employer suspected. She succeeded in captivating the king, who fell desperately in love with her and loaded her with jewels. It was then that she convinced the idea of being not a king's mistress, but a queen. As everyone knows, she realized her ambition. She was introduced into Czechoslovakia as the Countess Varaga Populovsky, an offshoot of the Romanovs, and became eventually Queen Varaga of Czechoslovakia. Not bad for a little Parisian actress. I have always heard that she played the part extremely well, but her triumph was not to be long-lived. The comrades of the Red Hand, furious at her betrayal, twice attempted her life. Finally, they worked up the worked up the country to such a pitch that a revolution broke out, into which both the king and queen perished. Their bodies, horribly mutilated and hardly recognizable, were recovered, attesting to the fury of the populace against the low-born foreign queen. Now in all this, it seems certain that Queen Varaga will still kept in with her confederate, King Victor. It is possible that the bold plan was his all along. What is known is that she continued to correspond with him in a secret code from the court of Czechoslovakia. For safety, the letters were written in English and signed with the name of an English lady then at the embassy. If any inquiry has been made, and the lady in question had denied her signature, it is possible that she would not have been believed, for the letters were those of a guilty woman to her lover. It was your name she used, Mrs. Ravel. I know, said Virginia. Her color was coming and going unevenly. So that is the truth of the letters. I have wondered and wondered. What a blackguardly trick, cried Bill indignantly. The letters were addressed to Captain O'Neill at his rooms in Paris, and their principal purpose may have light shed upon it by a curious fact which came to light later. After the assassination of the king and queen, many of the crown jewels, which had fallen, of course, into the hands of the mob, found their way to Paris, and it was discovered that in 9 cases out of 10, the principal stones had been replaced by paste, and, mind you, there were some very famous stones among the jewels of Czechoslovakia. So, as a queen, Angèle Maurice still practiced her former activities. You see now where we have arrived. Nicholas IV and Queen Varaga came to England, and were the guests of the late Marquis of Cateran, then Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. Czechoslovakia is a small country, but it could not be left out. Queen Varaga was necessarily received, and there we have a royal personage, and at the same time an expert thief. There is also no doubt that the substitute, which was so wonderful as to deceive everyone but an expert, could only have been fashioned by King Victor, and indeed the whole plan, in its daring and audacity, pointed to him as the author. What happened? Asked Virginia. Hushed up, said Superintendent Battle laconically. Not a mention of it's ever been made public to this day. We did all that could be done on the quiet, and that was a good deal more than you'd ever imagine, by the way. We've got methods of our own that would surprise. That jewel didn't leave England with the Queen of Czechoslovakia, I can tell you that much. No, Her Majesty hid it somewhere, but where we've never been able to discover. But I shouldn't wonder, Superintendent Battle let his eyes wander gently around, if it wasn't somewhere in this room. Anthony leapt to his feet. What? After all these years? He cried incredulously. Impossible. You do not know the particular circumstances, monsieur, said the Frenchman quickly. Only a fortnight later, the revolution in Czechoslovakia broke out, and the king and queen were murdered. Also, Captain O'Neill was arrested in Paris and sentenced on a minor charge. We hoped to find the packet of code letters in his house, but it appears that this has been stolen by some Czechoslovakian go-between. The man turned up in Czechoslovakia just before the revolution and then disappeared completely. He probably went abroad, said Anthony thoughtfully. To Africa, as likely as not, and you bet he hung on to that packet. It was as good as a gold mine to him. It's odd how things come about. They probably called him Dutch Pedro or something like that out there. He caught Superintendent Battle's expressionless glance bent upon him and smiled. It's not really clairvoyance, Battle, he said, though it sounds like it. I'll tell you presently. There is one thing that you have not explained, said Virginia. Where does this link up with the memoirs? There must be a link, surely. Madame is very quick, said Lemoine approvingly. Yes, there is a link. Count Stiptich was also staying at Chimneys at the time. So that he might have known about it? Parfaitement? And of course, said Battle, if he's blurted it out in his precious memoirs, the fat will be in the fire, especially after the way the whole thing was hushed up. Anthony lit a cigarette. There's no possibility of there being a clue in the memoirs as to where the stone was hidden? He asked. Very likely, said Battle decisively. He was never in with the Queen, opposed the marriage tooth and nail. She's not likely to have taken him into her confidence. I wasn't expecting such a thing for a minute, said Anthony, but by all accounts he was a cunning old boy. Unknown to her, he may have discovered where she hid the jewel. In that case, what would he have done, do you think? Sat tight, said Battle, after a moment's reflection. I agree, said the Frenchman. It was a ticklish moment, you see. To return the stone anonymously would have presented great difficulties. Also, the knowledge of its whereabouts would give him great power, and he liked power, that strange old man. Not only did he hold the Queen in the hollow of his hand, but he had a powerful weapon to negotiate with at any time. It was not the only secret he possessed. Oh, no. He collected secrets like some men collect rare pieces of china. It is said that once or twice before his death he boasted to people of the things he could make public if the fancy took him, and once at least he declared that he intended to make some startling revelations in his memoirs. Hence, the Frenchman smiled rather dryly, the general anxiety to get hold of them. Our own secret police intend to seize them, but the Count took the precaution to have them conveyed away before his death. Still, there's no real reason to believe that he knew this particular secret, said Battle. I beg your pardon, said Anthony quietly. There are his own words. What? Both detectives stared at him as though unable to believe their ears. When Mr. McGrath gave me the manuscript to bring to England, he told me the circumstances of his one meeting with Count Stiptich. It was in Paris. At some considerable risk to himself, Mr. McGrath rescued the Count from a band of Apaches. He was, I understand, shall we say, a trifle exhilarated. Being in that condition, he made two rather interesting remarks. One of them was to the effect that he knew where the Koh-i-Noor was, a statement to which my friend paid very little attention. He also said that the gang in question were King Victor's men. Taken together, those two remarks are very significant. Good Lord! Ejaculated Superintendent Battle. I should say they were. Even the murder of Prince Michael wears a different aspect. King Victor has never taken a life, said the Frenchman. The Frenchman reminded him. Well, supposing he were surprised when he was searching for the jewel. Is he in England, then? Asked Anthony sharply. You say that he was released a few months ago. Didn't you keep track of him? A rather rueful smile overspread the French detective's face. We tried to, monsieur, but he is a devil, that man. He gave us the slip at once. At once. We thought, of course, that he would make straight for England, but no, he went... Where do you think? Where? Asked Anthony. He was staring intently at the Frenchman, and absent-mindedly fingers played with a box of matches. To America, to the United States. What? There was sheer amazement in Anthony's tone. Yes, and what do you think he called himself? What part do you think he played over there? The part of Prince Nicholas of Czechoslovakia. The matchbox fell from Anthony's hand, but his amazement was fully equaled by that of Battle. Impossible! Not so, my friend. You too will get the news in the morning. It has been the most colossal bluff. As you know, Prince Nicholas was rumored to have died in the Congo years ago. Our friend King Victor seized on that. Difficult to prove a death of that kind. He resurrected Prince Nicholas and played him to such purpose that he gets away with a tremendous haul of American dollars, all on account of the supposed oil concessions. But by a mere accident he was unmasked, and he had to leave the country hurriedly. This time he did come to England, and that is why I am here. Sooner or later he will come to Chimneys. That is, if he is not already here. You think that... I think he was here the night Prince Michael died, and again last night. It was another attempt, eh? Said Battle. It was another attempt. What has me bothered, continued Battle, was wondering what had become of Monsieur Lemoine here. I'd had word from Paris that he was on his way over here to work with me, and couldn't make out why he hadn't turned up. I must indeed apologize, said Lemoine. You see, I arrived on the morning after the murder. It occurred to me at once that it would be as well for me to study things from an unofficial standpoint without appearing officially as your colleague. I thought the great possibilities lie that way. I was, of course, aware that I was bound to be an object of suspicion, but that in a way furthered my plan, since it would not put the people I was after on their guard. I can assure you that I have seen a good deal that is interesting in the last 2 days. But look here, said Bill. What really did happen last night? What? Hang on, Snockings. What do you want and where are you? Hi. Are you going to come up into my lap? Come on. Snockings for you people. Now please don't interrupt me with whines. Sorry about that. But look here, said Bill. What really did happen last night? I'm afraid, said Monsieur Lemoine, that I gave you a rather violent exercise. It was you I chased, then. Oh, Snockings. Yes, I can recount things to you. I came up here to watch, convinced that the secret had to do with this room since the prince had been killed here. I stood outside on the terrace. Presently I became aware that someone was moving about in this room. I could see the flash of a torch now and then. I tried the middle window and found it unlatched. Whether the man had entered that way earlier, or whether he had left it so as a blind in case he was disturbed, I do not know. Very gently I pushed it back and slipped inside the room. Step by step I found my way until I was in a spot where I could watch operations without likelihood of being discovered myself. The man himself I could not see clearly. His back was to me, of course, and he was silhouetted against the light of the torch, so that his outline only could be seen. Okay, now I can put my earbud back in. Oop. Hang on. Sorry about this. Okay, there we go. The man himself I could not see clearly. His back was to me, of course, and he was silhouetted against the light of the torch so that his outline only could be seen. But his actions filled me with surprise. He took to pieces first one and then the other of those 2 suits of armor, examined each one piece by piece. When he had convinced himself that what he sought was not there, he began tapping the paneling of the wall under that picture. What he would have done next I do not know. The interruption came. You burst in. He looked at Bill. Our well-meant interference was really rather a pity, said Virginia thoughtfully. In a sense, madame, it was. The man switched out his torch, and I, who had no wish as yet to be forced to reveal my identity, sprang for the window. I collided with the other 2 in the dark and fell headlong. I sprang up and out through the window. Mr. Eversley, taking me for his assailant, followed. I followed you first, said Virginia. Bill was only second in the race. And the other fellow had the sense to stay still and sneak out through the door. I wonder he didn't meet the rescuing crowd. That would present no difficulties, said Lemoine. He would be a rescuer in advance of the rest, that was all. Do you really think this Arsène Lupin fellow is actually among the household now? Asked Bill, his eyes sparkling. Arsène Lupin is a famous, at least I think fictional, I don't think he's based on truth, thief. And of course they made Lupin the Third after those books. I think it is a series. I should look it up to see if maybe that might be a good story time thing. Do you really think this Arsène Lupin fellow is actually among the household now? Asked Bill, his eyes sparkling. Why not? Said Lemoine. He could pass perfectly as a servant. For all we may know, he may be Boris Anchukov, the trusted servant of the late Prince Michael. He is an odd-looking bloke, agreed Bill, but Anthony was smiling. That's hardly worthy of you, Monsieur Lemoine, he said gently. The Frenchman smiled too. You've taken him on as your valet now, haven't you, Mr. Cade? Asked Superintendent Battle. Battle, I take off my hat to you. You know everything, but just as a matter of detail, he's taken me on, not I him. Why is that, I wonder, Mr. Cade? I don't know, said Anthony lightly. It's a curious taste, but perhaps he may have liked my face, or he may think I murdered his master and wished to establish himself as in a handy position for executing revenge upon me. He rose and went over to the windows, pulling the curtains. Daylight, he said with a slight yawn. There won't be any more excitements now. Lemoine rose also. I will leave you, he said. We shall perhaps meet again later in the day. With a graceful bow to Virginia, he stepped out of the window. Oh, bed, said Virginia, yawning. Oh, it's all been very exciting. Come on, Bill, go to bed like a good little boy. The breakfast table will see us not, I fear. Anthony stayed at the window, looking after the retreating form of Monsieur Lemoine. You wouldn't think it, said Battle behind him, but that's supposed to be the cleverest detective in France. I don't know that I wouldn't, said Anthony thoughtfully. Really think I would. Well, said Battle, he was right about the excitements of this night being over. By the way, do you remember my telling you about that man we'd found shot near Staines? Yes, why? Nothing. They've identified him, that's all. It seems he was called Giuseppe Manueli. He was a waiter at the Blitz in London. Curious, isn't it? He's onto him. Sorry, knocking stuff fur all over my face. Chapter 20. Battle and Anthony confer. Anthony said nothing. He continued to stare out the window. Superintendent Battle looked for some time at this motionless back. Oh, good night, sir, he said at last, and moved to the door. Anthony stirred. Wait a minute, Battle. The superintendent halted obediently, and Anthony left the window. He drew out a cigarette from his case and lighted it. Then, between two puffs of smoke, he said, I'm very interested in this business at Staines. You seem very interested in this business at Staines. I wouldn't go so far as that, sir. It's the unusual, that's all. Do you think the man was shot where he was found, or do you think he was killed elsewhere and the body brought to that particular spot afterwards? I think he was shot somewhere else and the body brought there in a car. You think so, too, said Anthony. Something in the emphasis of his tone made the detective look up sharply. Any ideas of your own, sir? Do you know who brought him there? Yes, said Anthony. I did. He was a little annoyed at the absolutely unruffled calm preserved by the other. I must say you take these shocks very well, Battle, he remarked. Never display emotion. That's a rule that was given to me once, and I found it very useful." "You live up to it, certainly," said Anthony. "I can't say I've ever seen you ruffled. Well, do you want to hear the whole story?" "If you please, Mr. Cade." Anthony pulled up two of the chairs. Both men sat down, and Anthony recounted the events of the preceding Thursday night. Battle listened immovably. There was a far-off twinkle in his eyes as Anthony finished. "You know, sir," he said, "you'll get into trouble one of these days." "Then for the second time, I'm not to be taken into custody?" "We always like to give a man plenty of rope," said Superintendent Battle. "Very delicately put," said Anthony, without unduly stressing the end of the proverb. "What I can't make out, sir," said Battle, "is why you decided to come across with this now." "It's rather difficult to explain," said Anthony. "You see, Battle, I've come to have really a very high opinion of your abilities. The moment comes, you're always there. Look at tonight. And it occurred to me that in withholding this knowledge of mine, I was seriously cramping your style. You deserve to have access to all the facts. I've done what I could, and up to now I've made a mess of things. Until tonight I couldn't speak for Mrs. Ravel's sake. But now that those letters have been definitely proven to have nothing whatsoever to do with her, any idea of her complicity becomes absurd. Perhaps I advised her badly in the first place, but it struck me that her statement of having paid this man money to suppress the letters, simply as a whim, might take a bit of believing." "It might by a jury," said Battle. "Juries never have any imagination." "But you accept it quite easily," said Anthony, looking curiously at it. "Well, you see, Mr. Cade, most of my work has lain amongst these people. What they call the upper classes, I mean. You see, the majority of people are always wondering what the neighbors will think. But tramps and aristocrats don't. They just do the first thing that comes into their heads, and they don't bother to think what anyone thinks of them. I'm not meaning just the idle rich, the people who give big parties and so on. I mean those that have had it born and bred in them for generations, that nobody else's opinions account but their own. I've always found the upper classes the same, fearless, truthful, and sometimes extraordinarily foolish." "This is a very interesting lecture, Battle. I suppose you'll be writing your reminiscences one of these days? They ought to be worth reading, too." The detective acknowledged the suggestion with a smile, but said nothing. "I'd like rather to ask you one question," continued Anthony. "Did you connect me at all with the Staines affair? I fancied from your manner that you did." "Quite right. I had a hunch that way, but nothing definite to go upon. Your manner was very good, if I may say so, Mr. Cade. You never outdid the carelessness." "I'm afraid of that," said Anthony. "I've a feeling that ever since I met you, you've been laying little traps for me. Now, on the whole, I've managed to avoid falling into them, but the strain has been acute. Battle smiled grimly. "That's how you get a crook in the end, sir. Keep him on the run, to and fro, turning and twisting. Sooner or later his nerve goes, and you've got him." "You're a cheerful fellow, Battle. When will you get me, I wonder?" "Plenty of rope, sir," quoted the superintendent. "Plenty of rope." "In the meantime," said Anthony, "I am still the amateur assistant?" "That's it, Mr. Cade. Watson to your Sherlock, in fact. Detective stories are all mostly bunkum," said Battle unemotionally. "But they amuse people," he added as an afterthought, "and they're useful sometimes." "In what way?" asked Anthony curiously. "They encourage the universal idea that the police are stupid. When we get an amateur of crime, such as a murder, that's very useful indeed." Anthony looked at him for some minutes in silence. Battle sat quite still, blinking now and then, with no expression whatsoever on his placid, square face. Presently he rose. "Not much good going to bed now," he observed. As soon as he's up, I want to have a few words with his lordship. Anyone who wants to leave the house can do so now. At the same time, I should be much obliged to his lordship if he'll extend an informal invitation to his guests to stay on. You'll accept it, sir, if you please, and Mrs. Revell also." "Have you ever found the revolver?" asked Anthony suddenly. "You mean the one Prince Michael was shot with? No, I haven't, but it must be in the house or grounds. I'll take a hint from you, Mr. Cade, and send some boys up bird nesting. If I could get hold of the revolver, we might get forward a bit. That and the bundle of letters. You say that a letter with the heading Chimneys was amongst them? Depend upon it, that was the one. Oh, goodness. Depend upon it, that was the last one written. The instructions for finding the diamond are written in code in the letter." "What's your theory for the killing of Giuseppe?" asked Anthony. "I could always say he was a regular... I should say he was a regular thief, and that he was got hold of, either by King Victor or by the comrades of the Red Hand, and employed by them. I shouldn't wonder at all if the comrades and King Victor aren't working together. The organization has plenty of money and power, but it isn't very strong in brain. Giuseppe's task was to steal the memoirs. They couldn't have known that you had the letters. It's a very odd coincidence that you should have, by the way." "I know," said Anthony. "It's amazing when you come to think of it. Giuseppe gets hold of the letters instead, is at first vastly chagrined, then sees the cutting from the paper, and has the brilliant idea of turning them to account on his own by blackmailing the lady. He has, of course, no idea of their real significance. The comrades find out what he is doing, believe that he is deliberately double-crossing them, and decree his death. They're very fond of executing traitors. It has a picturesque element which seems to appeal to them. What I can't quite make out is the revolver with Virginia engraved upon it. There's too much finesse about that for the comrades. As a rule, they enjoy plastering their red hand sign about in order to strike terror into other would-be traitors. Now, it looks to me as though King Victor has stepped in there, but what his motive was, I don't know. It looks like a very deliberate attempt to saddle Mrs. Revell with the murder, and on the surface, there doesn't seem any particular point in that." "I had a theory," said Anthony, "but it didn't work out according to plan." He told Battle of Virginia's recognition of Michael. Battle nodded his head. "Oh, yes, no doubt as to his identity. By the way, that old Baron has a very high opinion of you. He speaks of you in most enthusiastic terms." "That's very kind of him," said Anthony, "especially as I've given him full warning that I mean to do my utmost to get hold of the missing memoirs before Wednesday next." "You'll have a job to do that," said Battle. "Yes, you think so? I suppose King Victor and company have got the letters." Battle nodded. "Pinched them off Giuseppe that day in Pont Street. Prettily planned piece of work, that. Yes, they've got 'em all right, and they've decoded them, and they know where to look." "What?" "Snockings is story time, and you need to be quiet, please." Both men were on the point of passing out of the room. "In here?" said Anthony, jerking his head back. "Exactly in here. But they haven't found the prize yet, and they're going to run a pretty risk trying to get it." "I suppose," said Anthony, "that you've got a plan in that subtle head of yours." Battle returned no answer. He looked particularly stolid and unintelligent. Then, very slowly, he winked. "Want my help?" asked Anthony. "I do, and I shall want someone else's." "Who is that?" "Mrs. Revell's. You may have noticed it, Mr. Cade, but she's a lady who has a particularly beguiling way with her." "I've noticed it, all right," said Anthony. He glanced at his watch. I'm inclined to agree with you about bed battle. Dip in the lake and a hearty breakfast will be far more to the point. He ran lightly upstairs to his bedroom. Whistling to himself, he discarded his evening clothes and picked up a dressing gown and a bath towel. Then suddenly he stopped dead in front of the dressing table, staring at the object that reposed demurely in front of the looking-glass. Sorry, Snocking's back there. For a moment he could not believe his eyes. He took it up, examined it closely. Yes, there was no mistake. It was the bundle of letters, signed Virginia Revell. They were intact, not one missing. Anthony dropped into a chair, the letters in his hand. My brain must be cracking, he murmured. I can't understand a quarter of what's going on in this house. Why should the letters reappear like a damned conjuring trick? Who put them on my dressing table? Why? And to all these very pertinent questions, he could find no satisfactory reply. Chapter 21. Mr. Isaacstein's Suitcase. At 10 o'clock that morning, Lord Caterham and his daughter were breakfasting. Bundle was looking very thoughtful. "Father," she said at last. Lord Caterham, absorbed in the Times, did not reply. "Father," said Bundle again, more sharply. Lord Caterham, torn from his interested perusal of forthcoming sales of rare books, looked up absent-mindedly. "Eh?" he said. "Did you speak?" "Yes. Who is it who's had breakfast?" She nodded towards a place that had evidently been occupied. The rest were all expectant. "Oh, what's his name? Fat Ikey?" Bundle and her father had enough sympathy between them to comprehend each one's somewhat misleading observations. "That's it." "Did I see you talking to the detective this morning before breakfast?" Lord Caterham sighed. "Yes, he buttonholed me in the hall. I told him the hours before breakfast should be sacred. I shall have to go abroad. A strain on my nerves." Bundle interrupted unceremoniously. "What did he say?" "Said everyone who wanted to could clear out." "Well," said Bundle, "that's all right. That's what you've been wanting." "I know, but he didn't leave it at that. He went on to say that nevertheless he wanted me to ask everyone to stay on." I don't understand," said Bundle, wrinkling her nose. "So confusing and contradictory," complained Lord Caterham. "Before breakfast, too." "What did he say?" What did you say?" "Oh, I agreed, of course. It's never any good arguing with these people, especially before breakfast," continued Lord Caterham, reverting to his principal grievance. "Who have you asked so far?" "Cade. He was up very early this morning. He's going to stop on. I don't mind that. I can't quite make the fellow out, but I like him. I like him very much." "So does Virginia," said Bundle, drawing a pattern on the table with her fork. "Eh? So do I, but that doesn't seem to matter." "And I asked Isaacstein," continued Lord Caterham. "Well?" "But fortunately he's got to go back to town. Don't forget to order the car for the 10:50, by the way." "All right." "Now, if I can only get rid of Fish, too," continued Lord Caterham, his spirits rising. "I thought you liked talking to him about your mouldy old books." So I did, rather. But it gets monotonous when one finds that one is always doing all the talking. Fish is very interested, but he never volunteers any statements of his own." "It's better than doing all the listening," said Bundle. "Like one does with George Lomax." Lord Caterham shuddered at the remembrance. "George is all very well on platforms," said Bundle. "I've clapped him myself, though of course I know all the time that he's talking balderdash. And anyways, I'm a socialist." "I know, my dear, I know," said Lord Caterham hastily. "It's all right," said Bundle. I'm not going to bring politics into the home. That's what George does. Public speaking in private life. It ought to be abolished by the Act of Parliament." "Quite so," said Lord Caterham. "What about Virginia?" asked Bundle. "Is she to be asked to stop on?" "Battle said everybody," says he firmly. "Have you asked her to be my stepma yet?" "I don't think it would be any good," said Lord Caterham mournfully, "although she did call me darling last night, but that's the worst of these attractive young women with affectionate dispositions. They'll say anything, and they mean absolutely nothing by it." "No," agreed Bundle. "It would have been much more hopeful if she'd thrown a boot at you or tried to bite you. You modern young people seem to have such unpleasant ideas about love-making," said Lord Caterham plaintively. "It comes from reading the Sheik," said Bundle. "Desert love, thrown her about, etc." "What is the Sheik?" asked Lord Caterham simply. "Is it a poem?" Bundle looked at him with commiserating pity. Then she rose and kissed the top of his head. "Dear old Daddy," she remarked, and sprang lightly out of the window. Lord Caterham went back to the sales room. I realize by window they mean like a floor-to-ceiling door window thing. Yeah, instead of, the one with the shutters. Yeah. But I keep picturing somebody climbing over a sill and leaping out. It's quite an interesting picture in my head. Lord Caterham went back to the sales rooms. He jumped when addressed suddenly by Mr. Hiram Fish, who had made his usual noiseless entry. "Good morning, Lord Caterham." "Oh, good morning," said Lord Caterham. "Good morning, nice day." "The weather is delightful," said Mr. Fish. He helped himself to coffee. By way of food, he took a piece of dry toast. "Do I hear correctly that the embargo is removed?" he asked after a minute or two. "That we are all free to depart?" Yes, said Lord Caterham. "As a matter of fact, I hoped, that I shall be delighted." His conscience drove him on. "Only too delighted if you will stay on for a little." "Why, Lord Caterham, it's been a beastly visit, I know," said Lord Caterham hurriedly. "Too bad. Shame. Shan't blame you for wanting to run away. You just misjudged me, Lord Caterham. The associations have been painful, no one can deny that point, but the English countryside life, as lived in the mansions of the great, has a powerful attraction for me. I am interested in the study of these conditions. It is a thing we lack completely in America. I shall be only too delighted to accept your very kind invitation to stay on." I think she was going for like a southern drawl or something when she's typing this, the American accent out. "Oh, well," said Lord Caterham, "that's that. Absolutely delighted, my dear fellow, absolutely delighted." Spurring himself on to a false geniality of manner, Lord Caterham murmured something about having to see his bailiff and escaped from the room. In the hall he saw Virginia just descending the staircase. "Shall I take you in to breakfast?" said Lord Caterham tenderly. "I've had it in bed, thank you, and frightfully sleepy this morning." She yawned. "Had a bad night, perhaps?" "Not exactly a bad night. From one point of view, decidedly a good night." "Oh, Lord Caterham!" She slipped her hand inside his arm and gave it a squeeze. "I am enjoying myself. You are a darling to ask me down." "You'll stop on for a bit, then, won't you? Battle is lifting the embargo, but I wanted you to stay particularly. So does Bundle." "Of course I'll stay. That's sweet of you to ask me." "Ah," said Lord Caterham. He sighed. "What is your secret sorrow?" asked Virginia. "Has anyone bitten you?" "That's just it," said Lord Caterham mournfully. Virginia looked puzzled. "You don't feel well by any chance that you want to throw a boot at me?" "No, I can't say you don't." "Oh, well, That's of no consequence. Lord Caterham drifted sadly away, and Virginia passed out through a side door into the garden. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the crisp October air, which was infinitely refreshing to one in her slightly jaded state. She started a little to find Superintendent Battle at her elbow. The man seemed to have an extraordinary lack of appearing out of space without the least warning. "Good morning, Mrs. Revell. Not too tired, I hope?" Virginia shook her head. "Oh, it was a most exciting night, she said. Well worth the loss of a little sleep. The only thing is, today seems a trifle dull after it." "There's a nice shady place down under that cedar tree," remarked the superintendent. "Shall I take a chair down to it for you?" "If you think it's the best thing for me to do," said Virginia solemnly. "You're very quick, Mrs. Revell. Yes, it's quite true. I do want a word with you." He picked up a long wicker chair and carried it down to the lawn. Virginia followed him with a cushion under her arm. "Very dangerous place, that terrace," remarked the detective. "That is, if you want to have a private conversation." "I'm getting excited again, Superintendent Battle." "Oh, it's nothing important." He took out a big watch and glanced at it. 10:30. I'm starting for Wyvern Abbey in 10 minutes to report to Mr. Lomax. Plenty of time. I only wanted to know if you could tell me a little more about Mr. Cade." "About Mr. Cade?" Virginia was startled. "Yes, when you first met him, and how long you've known him, and so forth." Battle's manner was easy and pleasant enough. He even refrained from looking at her, and the fact that he did so made her vaguely uneasy. "It's more difficult than you think," she said at last. "He did a great service once." Battle interrupted her. "Before you go any further, Mrs. Revell, I'd just like to say something. Last night, after you and Mr. Eversley had gone to bed, Mr. Cade told me all about the letters and the man who was killed in your house." "He did?" gasped Virginia. "Yes, and very wisely, too. Clears up a lot of misunderstandings. There's only one thing he didn't tell me, how long he had known you. Now, I've a little idea of my own about that. You shall tell me if I'm right or wrong. I think that the day he came to your house in Pont Street was the first time you had ever seen him." "Ah, I see I'm right. It was so." Virginia said nothing. For the first time she felt afraid of this stolid man with the expressionless face. She understood that what Anthony had meant when he said that there were no flies on Superintendent Battle. "Has he ever told you anything about his life?" the detective continued. "Before he was in South Africa, I mean. Canada, or before that, the Sudan? Or about his boyhood?" Virginia merely shook her head. "And yet I'd bet he's got something worth telling. You can't mistake the face of a man who's led a life of daring and adventure. He could tell you some interesting tales if he cared to." "If you want to know about his past life, why don't you cable to that friend of his, Mr. McGrath?" Virginia asked. "Oh, we have. But it seems he is up country somewhere. Still, there's no doubt Mr. Cade was in Boulaway when he said he was. But I wondered what he'd been doing before he came to South Africa. He's only had that job with Castle about a month. He took out his watch again. I must be off. The car will be waiting." Virginia watched him retreat to the house, but she did not move from her chair. She hoped that Anthony might appear and join her. Instead came Bill Eversley with a prodigious yawn. "Oh, thank God I've got a chance to speak with you at last, Virginia," he complained. "Well, speak to me very gently, Bill, darling, or I shall burst into tears. Has someone been bullying you?" "Not exactly bullying me. Getting inside my mind and turning it inside out. I feel as though I've been jumped on by an elephant." "A Battle?" "Yes, Battle. He's a terrible man, really." "Well, never mind Battle. I say, Virginia, I do love you so awfully. Not this morning, Bill. I'm not strong enough. Anyway, I've always told you that the best people don't propose before lunch." Good Lord, said Bill. I could propose to you before breakfast. Virginia shuddered. Bill, be sensible and intelligent for a minute. I want to ask your advice. If you'd once make up your mind to it and say you'd marry me, I'd feel miles better, I'm sure. You'd feel miles better, I'm sure. Happier, and more settled down. Listen to me, Bill. Proposing to me is your idée fixe. All men propose when they're bored and can't think of anything to say. Remember my age and my widowed state, and go and make love to a pure young girl. My darling Virginia! Oh, blast, there's that French idiot bearing down on us. It was indeed Monsieur Lemoine, black-bearded and correct of demeanor as ever. Good morning, madame. You are not fatigued, I trust? Not in the least. That is excellent. Good morning, Mr. Eversley. How would it be if we promenaded ourselves a little, the three of us? Suggested the Frenchman. How about it, Bill? Asked Virginia. Oh, all right, said the unwilling young gentleman by her side. He heaved himself up from the grass, and the three of them walked slowly along, Virginia between the two men. She was sensible at once of a strange undercurrent of excitement in the Frenchman, though she had no clue as to what caused it. Soon, with her usual skill, she was putting him at ease, asking him questions, listening to his answers, and gradually drawing him out. Presently he was telling them anecdotes of the famous King Victor. He talked well, albeit with a certain bitterness, as he described the various ways in which the detective bureau had been outwitted. But all the time, despite the real absorption of Lemoine in his own narrative, Virginia had a feeling that he had some other object in view. Moreover, she judged that Lemoine, under cover of his story, was deliberately striking out his own course across the park. They were not just strolling idly. He was deliberately guiding them to a certain direction. Suddenly, he broke off his story and looked around. They were standing just where the drive intersected the park, before turning an abrupt corner by a clump of trees. Lemoine was staring at a vehicle approaching them from the direction of the house. Virginia's eyes followed. "It's the luggage cart," she said, "taking Isaacstein's luggage and his valet to the station." "Is that so?" said Lemoine. He glanced down at his own watch and stated, "1,000 pardons. I have been longer here than I meant. Such charming company. Is it possible, do you think, that I might have a lift to the village?" He stepped out on the drive and signaled with his arm. The luggage cart stopped, and after a word or two of explanation, Lemoine climbed in behind. He raised his hat politely to Virginia and drove off. The other two stood and watched the cart disappearing with puzzled expressions. Just as the cart swung round the bend, a suitcase fell off into the drive. The cart went on. "Come on," said Virginia to Bill. "We're going to see something interesting. That suitcase was thrown out." "Nobody's noticed it," said Bill. They ran down the drive towards the fallen piece of luggage. Just as they reached it, Lemoine came round the corner of the bend on foot. He was hot from walking fast. "I was obliged to descend," he said pleasantly. "I found that I had left something behind." "This?" said Bill, indicating the suitcase. It was a handsome case of heavy pigskin with the initials H.I. on it. "What a pity," said Lemoine gently. "It must have fallen out. Shall we lift it from the road?" Without waiting for a reply, he picked up the suitcase and carried it over to the belt of trees. He stooped over it. Something flashed in his hand, and the lock slipped back. He spoke, and his voice was totally different, quick and commanding. "Car will be here in a minute," he said. "Is it in sight?" Virginia looked back towards the house. "No." "Good." With deft fingers he tossed the things out of the suitcase. Gold-topped bottles, silk pajamas, a variety of socks. Suddenly his whole figure stiffened. He caught up what appeared to be a bundle of silk underwear and unrolled it rapidly. A slight exclamation broke from Bill. In the center of the bundle was a heavy revolver. I hear the horn, said Virginia. Like lightning, Lemoine repacked the suitcase. The revolver he wrapped in a silk handkerchief of his own and slipped it into his pocket. He snapped the locks of the suitcase and turned quickly to Bill. Take it. Madame will be with you. Stop the car and explain that it fell off the luggage cart. Do not mention me. Bill stepped quickly down to the drive just as the big Lancaster limousine with Eisenstein inside it came round the corner. The chauffeur slowed down, and Bill swung the suitcase up to him. Fell off the luggage cart, he exclaimed. What? We happened to see it. He caught a momentary glimpse of a startled face as the financier stared at him, and then the car swept on again. They went back to Lemoine. He was standing with a revolver in his hand, and a look of gloating satisfaction in his face. A long shot, he said, a very long shot, but it came off. Stockings keeps coming in and out of the room. She's being restless today. Chapter 22, The Red Signal. Superintendent Battle was standing in the library at Wyvern Abbey. George Lomax, seated before a desk overflowing with papers, was frowning portentously. Superintendent Battle had opened proceedings by making a brief and businesslike report. Since then, the conversation had lain almost entirely with George, and Battle had contented himself with making brief and usually monosyllabic replies to the other's questions. On the desk, in front of George, was the packet of letters Anthony had found on this dressing table. I can't understand it all, said George irritably as he picked up the packet. They're in code, you say? Just so, Mr. Lomax. And where does he say he found them? On his dressing table? Battle repeated word for word Anthony Cade's account of how he had come to regain possession of the letters. And he brought them at once to you. That was quite proper. But who could have placed them in his room? Battle shook his head. It's the sort of thing you ought to know, complained George. It sounds to me very fishy indeed. What do we know about this man Cade, anyway? He appears in a most mysterious manner, under highly suspicious circumstances, and we know nothing whatever about him. I may say that I, personally, don't care for his manner at all. You've made inquiries about him, I suppose? Superintendent Battle permitted himself a patient smile. We wired at once to South Africa, and his story has been confirmed on all points. He was in Bulawayo with Mr. McGrath at the time he stated. Previous to their meeting, he was employed by Messrs. Castle, the tourist agents. Just what I should have expected, said George. He has the kind of cheap assurance that succeeds in a certain type of employment. But about these letters, steps must be taken at once. At once! The great man puffed himself out and swelled importantly. Superintendent Battle opened his mouth, but George forestalled him. There must be no delay. These letters must be decoded without any loss of time. Let me see, who is the man? There is a man connected with the British Museum. That's all there is to know about ciphers. Ran the department for us during the war. Where's Miss Oscar? She will know. Name written like Professor Winwood? Asked Battle. Exactly! I remember perfectly now. He must be wired immediately. I've done so, Mr. Lomax, an hour ago. He will arrive by the 12:10. Oh, very good, very good. Oh, thank heavens, something is off my mind. I shall have to be in town today. You can get along without me, I suppose? I think so, sir. Well, do your best, Battle, do your best. I'm terribly rushed just at present. Just so, sir. By the way, why did not Mr. Eversley come over with you? He was still asleep, sir. We've been up all night, as I told you. Oh, quite so. I am frequently up nearly the whole night myself. To do the work in 36 hours in 24, that is my constant task. Send Eversley over at once when you get back, will you, Battle? I will give him your message, sir. Thank you, Battle. I realize that you had to repose a certain amount of confidence in him, but do you think it was strictly necessary to take my cousin, Mrs. Revell, into your confidence also? In view of the names signed to those letters, I do, Mr. Lomax. An amazing piece of effrontery, murmured George, his brow darkening as he looked at the bundle of letters. I remember the late King of Czechoslovakia. Charming fellow, but weak, deplorably weak. A tool in the hands of an unscrupulous woman. Have you any theory as to how these letters came to be restored to Mr. Cade? In my opinion, said Battle, that if people can't, it's my opinion that if people can't get a thing one way, they try another. I don't quite follow you, said George. This crook, this King Victor, he's always aware of by now that the council chamber is watched. So he'll let us have the letters, and let us do the decoding, and let us find the hiding place, and then trouble. But Lemoine and I, between us, will attend to that. You have a plan, eh? I wouldn't go so far as to say I've got a plan, but I've got an idea. It's a very unusual thing sometimes, an idea. Oh, useful, sorry. It's a very useful thing sometimes, an idea. Thereupon Superintendent Battle took his departure. He had no intention of taking George any further into his confidence. On the way back, he passed Anthony on the road and stopped. Going to give me a lift back to the house? Asked Anthony. That's good. Where have you been, Mr. Cade? Down to the station to inquire about trains. Battle raised his eyebrows. Thinking of leaving us soon? He inquired. Not just at present, laughed Anthony. By the way, what's upset Isaacstein? He arrived in the car just as I left, and he looked as though something had given him a nasty jolt. Mr. Isaacstein? Yes. I can't say I'm sure. I fancy it would take a good deal to jolt him. So did I, agreed Anthony. He's quite one of the strong, silent men of finance. Suddenly, Battle leant forward and touched the chauffeur on the shoulder. Stop, will you, and wait for me here. He jumped out of the car, much to Anthony's surprise, but in a minute or two the latter perceived Mr. Lemoine advancing to meet the English detective, and gathered that it was a signal from him that had attracted Battle's attention. There was a rapid colloquy between them, and then the superintendent returned to the car and jumped in again, bidding the chauffeur drive on. His expression had completely changed. They found the revolver, he said suddenly and curtly. What? Anthony gazed at him in great surprise. Where? In Isaacstein's suitcase. Oh, impossible! Nothing's impossible, said Battle. I ought to have remembered that. He sat perfectly still, tapping his knee with his hand. Who found it? Battle jerked his head over his shoulder. Lemoine, clever chap. They think no end of him at the Sûreté. But doesn't this upset all your ideas? No, said Superintendent Battle very slowly. I can't say it does. It was a bit of a surprise, I admit, at first, but it fits in very well with one idea of mine. Which is? But the superintendent branched off in a totally different subject. I wonder if you'd mind finding Mr. Eversley for me, sir. There's a message for him from Mr. Lomax. He is to go over to the Abbey at once. All right, said Anthony. The car had just drawn up to the great door. He's probably in bed still. I think not, said the detective. If you look, you'll see him walking under the trees here with Mrs. Revell. Wonderful eyes you have, haven't you, Battle? Said Anthony as he departed on his errand. He delivered the message to Bill, who was duly disgruntled. Damn it all, grumbled Bill to himself as he strode off to the house. Why can't Cotter sometimes leave me alone? Why can't those blasted colonials stay in their colonies? What do they want to come over here for and pick out all the best girls? I'm fed up to the teeth with everything. Have you heard about the revolver? Asked I don't know where Virginia turned into British, asked Virginia breathlessly as Bill left him. Battle told me. Rather staggering, isn't it? Isaac Stein was in a frightful state yesterday to get away, but I thought it was just nerves. He's about the one person I'd have pitched upon as being above suspicion. Can you see any motive for his wanting Prince Michael out of the way? Well, it certainly doesn't fit, agreed Virginia thoughtfully. Hang on. Nothing fits in anywhere, said Anthony disconsolately. I rather fancied myself as an amateur detective to begin with, and so far all I've done is to clear the character of the French governess at vast trouble and some little expense. Is that what you went to France for? Inquired Virginia. Yes, I went to Dinard and had an interview with the Comtesse de Breteuil. Awfully pleased with my own cleverness, fully expecting to be told that no such person as Mademoiselle Brune had ever been heard of. Instead of which I was given to understand that the lady in question had been the mainstay of the household for the past 7 years, so, unless the Comtesse is also a crook, that ingenious theory of mine falls to the ground. Virginia shook her head. Madame de Breteuil is quite above suspicion. I know her quite well, and I fancy I must have come across Mademoiselle in the chateau. I certainly know her face quite well. In that vague way one does know governesses and companions and people one sits opposite to in trains. It's awful, but I never really look at them properly. Do you? Well, they're exceptionally beautiful, admitted Anthony. Well, in this case, she broke off. What's the matter? Anthony was staring at the figure which detached itself from the clump of trees and stood there rigidly at attention. It was the Czechoslovakian Boris. Excuse me, said Anthony to Virginia. I must just speak to my dog a minute. He went across to where Boris was standing. Sorry, taking a look. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, sorry if it takes me a while to reply. I'm sometimes deep into the story and the chat is over there. So, what's the matter? What do you want? Master, said Boris, bowing. Yes, that's all very well, but you mustn't keep following me about like this. It looks odd. Without a word, Boris produced a soiled scrap of paper, evidently torn from a letter, and handed it to Anthony. What's this? Said Anthony. There was an address scrawled on the paper, nothing else. He dropped it, said Boris. I bring it to the master. Who dropped it? Foreign fellow. Why bring it to me? Boris looked at him reproachfully. Well, anyway, go away now, said Anthony. I'm busy. Boris saluted, turning sharply on his heel, and marched away. Anthony rejoined Virginia, thrusting the piece of paper into his pocket. What did he want? She asked curiously. And why do you call him your dog? Because he acts like one, said Anthony, answering the last question first. He must have been a retriever in his last incarnation, I think. He just brought me a piece of paper, which he says the foreign gentleman dropped. I suppose he meant Lemoine? I suppose so, acquiesced Virginia. He's always following me around, continued Anthony. Just like a dog. Says next to nothing, just looks at me with his big round eyes. I can't make him out. Well, perhaps he meant Isaac Stein, suggested Virginia. Isaac Stein looks foreign enough, heaven knows. Isaac Stein, murmured Anthony impatiently. Where the devil does he come in? Are you very sorry that you've mixed yourself up in all this? Asked Virginia suddenly. Sorry? Good Lord, no, I love it. I've spent most of my life looking for trouble, you know. Perhaps this time I've got a little more than I bargained for. Well, you're well out of the wood now, said Virginia, a little surprised by the unusual gravity of his tone. Not quite. They strolled on for a minute or two in silence. "There's some people," said Anthony, breaking the silence, "who don't conform to signals. An ordinary, well-regulated locomotive slows down or pulls up when it sees the red light hoisted against it. Perhaps I was born colorblind. When I see the red signal, I can't help forging ahead, and in the end, that spells disaster. Bound to. And quite right, really. That sort of thing is bad for traffic generally." He still spoke very seriously. "I suppose," said Virginia, "that you have taken a good many risks in your life. Pretty nearly everyone there is, except marriage." "That's rather cynical." "It wasn't meant to be. Marriage, the kind of marriage I mean, would be the biggest adventure of the lot." "I like that," said Virginia, flushing eagerly. "There's only one kind of woman I'd want to marry, the kind who is worlds removed from my type of life. What would we do about it? Is she to lead my life? Am I to lead hers?" "If she loved you." "Sentimentality, Mrs. Revell. You know it is. Love isn't a drug that you take to bind you to your surroundings. You can make it that, yes, but it's a pity. Love can be a lot more than that. But do you think the king and his beggar maid thought of married life after they'd married a year or two? Didn't she regret her rags and her bare feet and her careless life? You bet she did. Would it have been any good, his renouncing his crown for her sake? Not a bit of good either. He'd have made a damned bad beggar, I'm sure. And no woman respects a man when he's doing a thing thoroughly badly." "Have you fallen in love with a beggar maid, Mr. Cade?" inquired Virginia softly. "It's the other way around with me, but the principle's the same." "And there's no way out?" said Virginia. "There's always a way out," said Anthony gloomily. "I've got a theory that one can always get anything one wants, if one will pay the price. And do you know what the price is, 9 times out of 10? Compromise. A beastly thing, compromise, but it steals upon you as you near middle age. It's stealing upon me now. To get the woman I'd want, I'd even take up regular work." Virginia laughed. "I was brought up to trade, you know," said Anthony. "And you abandoned it?" "Yes." "Why?" "Matter principle." "Oh!" "You're a very unusual woman," said Anthony, suddenly turning and looking at her. "Why?" "You can refrain from asking questions." "You mean that I haven't asked you what your trade was?" "Just that." Again they walked on in silence. They were nearing the house now, passing close by the scented sweetness of the rose garden. "You understand well enough, I dare say," said Anthony, breaking the silence. "You know when a man's in love with you. I don't suppose you care a hang for me or for anyone else, but by God, I'd like to make you care." "Do you think you could?" said Virginia in a low voice. "Probably not, but I'd have a damned good try." "Are you sorry you ever met me?" she said suddenly. "Oh, Lord, no. It's the red signal again. When I first saw you, that day in Pont Street, I knew I was up against something that was going to hurt me like fun. Your face did that to me, just your face. There's magic in you from head to foot. Some women are like that, but I've never known a woman who had so much of it as you have. You'll marry someone respectable and prosperous, I suppose, and I shall return to my disreputable life, but I'll kiss you once more before I go. I swear I will." "You can't do it now," said Virginia softly. "Superintendent Battle is watching us out of the library window." Anthony looked at her. "You're rather a devil, Virginia," he said dispassionately. "Rather a dear, too." Then he waved his hand airily to Superintendent Battle. "Caught any criminals this morning, Battle?" "Not as yet, Mr. Cade." "That sounds hopeful." Battle, with the agility surprising in no stolid man, vaulted out of the library window and joined them on the terrace. "I've got Professor Winwood down here," he announced in a whisper. "Just this minute arrived. He's decoding the letters now. Would you like to see him at work?" His tone suggested that of the showman speaking of some pet exhibit. Receiving a reply in the affirmative, he led them up to the window and invited them to peep inside. Seated at a table, the letters spread out in front of him and writing busily on a big sheet of paper, was a small, red-haired man of middle-aged. He grunted irritably to himself as he wrote, and every now and then rubbed his nose violently until its hue almost rivaled that of his hair. Presently he looked up. "That you, Battle? What do you want me down here to unravel this tomfoolery for? A child in arms can do it. A baby of 2 could do it on his head. Call this thing a cipher, it leaps to the eye, man." "I'm glad of that, Professor," said Battle mildly. "But we're not all so clever as you are, you know." "It doesn't need cleverness," snapped the Professor. "It's routine work. Do you want the whole bundle done? It's a long business, you know, requires diligent application and close attention and absolutely no intelligence. I've done the one dated Chimneys, which you said was important." "What? Oh my gosh, Snoggings, what?" Sorry, she's been very whiny today. She woke me up about, let's see, was it 2 hours before I was supposed to get up? You wanted breakfast and you would not be quiet. I think that's about it, right? Are you going to please come into my lap and stop being a nuisance? Come on. Either that, or please stop meowing. Oh, now I have to figure out where you were. I'm sorry about that. I've done the one dated Chimneys, which you said was important. Might as well take the rest back to London and hand them over to one of my assistants. I really can't afford the time myself. I've come away now from a real teaser, and I want to get back to it. His eyes glistened a little. "Very well, Professor," assented Battle. "I am sorry we're such small fry. I'll explain to Mr. Lomax, but just this one letter that all the hurry is about. Lord Caterham is expecting you to stay for lunch, I believe." "Never have lunch," said the Professor. "Bad habit, lunch. Banana and water biscuit is all any sane and healthy man should need in the middle of the day." He seized his overcoat, which lay across the back of a chair. Battle went round to the front of the house, and a few minutes later, Anthony and Virginia heard the sound of a car driving away. Battle rejoined them, carrying in his hand the half-sheet of paper which the Professor had given him. "He's always like that," said Battle, referring to the departed Professor. "In the very deuce of a hurry. Clever man, though. Well, here's the kernel of Her Majesty's letter. Care to have a look at it?" Virginia stretched out a hand, and Anthony read it over her shoulder. It had been, he remembered, a long epistle breathing mingled passion and despair. The genius of Professor Winwood had transformed it into an essentially business-like communication. "Operations carried out successfully, but S double-crossed us. Has removed stone from hiding place, not in his room. I have searched, found following memorandum, which I think refers to it. Richmond 7 straight 8 left 3 right." "S," said Anthony. "Stiltage, of course. Cunning old dog. He changed the hiding place." "Richmond," said Virginia thoughtfully. "The diamond concealed somewhere at Richmond, I wonder." "His favorite spot for royalties," agreed Anthony. Battle shook his head. "I still think it's a reference to something in this house." "I know!" cried Virginia suddenly. Both men turned to look at her. "The Holbein portrait in the council chamber. They were tapping on the wall just below. It's a portrait of the Earl of Richmond." "You've got it," said Battle, and slapped his leg. He spoke with an animation quite unwonted. "That's the starting point, the picture, and the crooks know no more than we do what the figures refer to. Those 2 men in armor stand directly underneath the picture, and their first idea was that the diamond was hidden in one of them. The measurements might have been inches. That failed, And their next idea was a secret passage or stairway or a sliding panel. Do you know of any such thing, Mrs. Revell? Oh, I was doing that in Virginia's voice. My bad. Virginia shook her head. There's a priest hole and at least one secret passage I know, she said. I believe I've been shown them once, but I can't remember much about them now. Here's Bundle. She'll know. Bundle was coming quickly along the terrace towards them. I'm taking the Panhard up to the town after lunch, she remarked. Anyone want a lift? Wouldn't you like to come, Mr. Cade? We'll be back by dinner time. No, thanks, said Anthony. I'm quite happy and busy down here. The man fears me, said Bundle. Either my driving or my fatal fascination. Which is it? The latter, said Anthony, every time. Bundle, dear, said Virginia, is there any secret passage leading out of the council chamber? Rather, but it's only a mouldy one. Supposed to lead from Chimneys to Wyvern Abbey, but it did in the old days. But it's all blocked up now. You can only get along for about 100 yards from this end. The one upstairs in the White Gallery is ever so much more amusing, and the priest's hole isn't half bad. We're not regarding them from an artistic standpoint, explained Virginia. It's business. How do you get into the council chamber one? Hinged panel. I'll show it you after lunch if you like. Thank you, said Superintendent Battle. Shall we say at 2:30? Bundle looked at him with lifted eyebrows. Crook stuff? She inquired. Treadwell appeared on the terrace. Luncheon is served, my lady, he announced. Just taking a look at the time. I think we have enough time for one more chapter. Hi, are you being a nuisance again? Maybe. And you can see her, she is right there. Chapter 23, Encounter in the Rose Garden. At 2:30, a little party met together in the council chamber. Bundle, Virginia, Superintendent Battle, Monsieur Lemoine, and Anthony Cade. No good waiting until we get hold of Mr. Lomax, said Battle. This is the kind of business one wants to get on with quickly. If you've got any idea that Prince Michael was murdered by someone who got in his way, you're wrong, said Bundle. It can't be done. The other end's blocked completely. There's no question of that, milady, said Lemoine quickly. It is quite a different search that we make. Looking for something, are you? Asked Bundle quickly. Not the historic what-not by any chance. Lemoine looked puzzled. Explain yourself, Bundle, said Virginia encouragingly. You can when you try. The thingamabob, said Bundle. The historic diamond of purple princes that was pinched in the dark ages before I grew to years of discretion. Who told you this, Lady Eileen? Asked Battle. I've always known. One of the footmen told me when I was 12 years old. Footman? Said Battle. Lord, I'd like Mr. Lomax to have heard that. Is it one of George's closely guarded secrets? Asked Bundle. Oh, perfectly screaming. I never really thought it was true. George always was an ass. He must know that servants know everything. She went across to the Holbein portrait, touched a spring concealed somewhere at the side of it, and immediately, with a creaking noise, a section of the paneling swung inwards, revealing a dark opening. Entrez, messieurs et mesdames, said Bundle dramatically. Walk up, dearest. Best show of the season, and only a tanner. Both Lemoine and Battle were provided with torches. They entered the dark aperture first, and the other close on their heels. Hair's nice and fresh, remarked Battle. Must be ventilated somehow. He walked on ahead. The floor was rough, uneven stone, but the walls were bricked. As Bundle had said, the passage extended for a bare 100 yards. Then it came to an abrupt end with a fallen heap of masonry. Battle satisfied himself that there was no way of egress beyond, and then spoke over his shoulder. "We'll go back, if you please. I wanted just to spy out the land, so to speak." In a few minutes they were back again at the paneled entrance. "We'll start from here," said Battle. 7 straight, 8 left, 3 right. Take the first as paces." He paced 7 steps carefully, and bending down examined the ground. "About right, I should fancy. One time or another there's been a chalk mark made here. Now then, 8 left. That's not paces. The patches are only wide enough to go Indians. The straight file, anyway." "Say it in bricks," suggested Anthony. "Quite right, Mr. Cade. 8 bricks from the bottom of the top, or the top on the left-hand side. Try from the bottom first, it's easier." He counted up 8 bricks. "Now, 3 to the right of that one. 2, 3. Hello? Hello, what's this?" "I shall scream in a moment," said Bundle. "I know I shall. What is it?" Superintendent Battle was working at the brick with the point of his knife. His practiced eye had quickly seen that this particular brick was different from the rest. A minute or two's work, and he was able to pull it right out. Behind was a dark cavity. Battle thrust in his hand. Everyone waited in breathless expectancy. Battle drew out his hand again. He uttered an exclamation of surprise and anger. The others crowded round and stared uncomprehendingly at the 3 articles he held. For a moment it seemed as though their eyes must have deceived them. A card of small pearl buttons, a square of coarse knitting, and a piece of paper on which were inscribed a row of capital E's. "Well," said Battle, I'm danged. What's the meaning of this?" "Mon Dieu," muttered the freshman. "Ça c'est un peu trop fort." "What does it mean?" cried Virginia, bewildered. "Mean?" said Anthony. "There's only one thing it can mean. The late Count Stilpditch must have had a sense of humor. This is an example of that humor. I may say that I don't consider it particularly funny myself." "Do you mind explaining your meaning a little more clearly, sir?" said Superintendent Battle. "Certainly. This is the Count's little joke. He must have suspected that his memorandum had been read. When the crooks came to recover the jewel, they were to find instead this extremely clever conundrum. It's the sort of thing you pin onto yourself at book teas, and when people have to guess what you are. It has a meaning, then?" "I should say undoubtedly. If the Count had meant it to be merely offensive, he would have put a placard with 'sold' on it, or a picture of a donkey, or something crude like that." "A bit of knitting, some capital E's, and a lot of buttons," muttered Battle disconsolately. "C'est inouï," said Lemoine angrily. "Cipher number 2, said Anthony. "I wonder whether Professor Winwood would be any good in this one." "When was this passage used last, milady?" asked the Frenchman of Bundle. Bundle reflected. "I don't believe anyone's been into it for over 2 years. Priest Hall's the show exhibit for Americans and tourists generally." "Curious," murmured the Frenchman. "Why curious?" Lemoine stood and picked up a small object from the floor. "Because of this," he said. "This match has not lain here for 2 years, not even 2 days." "Any of you ladies or gentlemen drop this by any chance?" he asked. He received a negative all round. "Well, then," said Superintendent Battle, "we've seen all there is to see. We might as well get out of here." The proposal was assented to by all. The panel had swung to, but Bundle showed them how it was fastened from the inside. She unlatched it, swung it noiselessly open, and sprang through the opening, alighting in the council chamber with a resounding thud. "Damn!" said Lord Caterham, springing up from an armchair in which he appeared to have been taking 40 winks. "Poor old father," said Bundle. "Did I startle you?" I can't think, said Lord Caterham, why nobody nowadays ever sits still after a meal. It's a lost art. God knows Chimneys is big enough, but even here there doesn't seem to be a single room where I can be sure of a little peace. Good Lord, how many of you are there? Reminds me of the pantomimes I used to go to as a boy, where hordes of demons used to pop up out of the trap-doors. Demon number 7, said Virginia, approaching him and patting him on the head. Don't be cross. We're just exploring secret passages, that's all. There seems to be a positive boom in secret passages today, grumbled Lord Caterham, but not yet completely mollified. I've had to show that fellow Fish round them all this morning. When was that? Asked Battle quickly. Just before lunch. Seems he's heard of the one in here. Showed him that, and then took him up to the White Gallery, and we finished up with a priest's hole. But his enthusiasm was waning by that time. He looked bored to death. But I made him go through with it. Lord Caterham chuckled at the remembrance. Anthony put a hand on Lemoine's arm. Come outside, he said softly. I want to speak to you. The two men went out together through the window. When they had gone a sufficient distance from the house, Anthony drew from his pocket the scrap of paper that Boris had given him that morning. Look here, did you drop this? He said. Lemoine took it and examined it with some interest. No, he said. I have never seen it before. Why? Quite sure. Absolutely sure, monsieur. It's very odd. He repeated to Lemoine what Boris had said. The other listened with close attention. Oh, he might have meant Fish. No, I did not drop it. You say he found it in that clump of trees? Well, I assumed so, but he did not actually say so. It is just possible that it might have fluttered out of Monsieur Isaacstein's suitcase. Question Boris again. He handed the paper back to Anthony. After a minute or two, he said, What exactly do you know of this man Boris? Anthony shrugged his shoulders. I understood he was the late Prince Michael's trusted servant. It may be so, but make it your business to find out. Ask someone who knows, such as the Baron Lollapretzel. Perhaps this man was engaged but a few weeks ago. For myself, I have believed him honest. But who knows? King Victor is quite capable of making himself into a trusted servant at a moment's notice. Do you really think? Lemoine interrupted him. I will be quite frank. With me, King Victor is an obsession. I see him everywhere. At this moment, even I ask myself, this man who is talking to me, this Monsieur Cade, is he perhaps King Victor? Good Lord, said Anthony. You have got it badly. What do I care for the diamond? For the discovery of the murder of Prince Michael? I leave those affairs to my colleague of Scotland Yard, whose business it is. Me, I am in England for one purpose, and one purpose only, to capture King Victor, and capture him red-handed. Nothing else matters. Think you'll do it? Asked Anthony, lighting a cigarette. How should I know? Said Lemoine, with sudden despondency. Said Anthony. They had regained the terrace. Superintendent Battle was standing near the French window in a wooden attitude. The poor old Battle, said Anthony. Let's go and cheer him up. He paused a minute and said, You know you're an odd fish in some ways, Monsieur Lemoine. In what ways? Said Monsieur Cade. Well, said Anthony, in your place I should have been inclined to note down that address that I showed you. It may be of no importance, quite conceivably. On the other hand, it might be very important indeed. Lemoine looked at him for a minute or two steadily. Then, with a slight smile, he drew back the cuff of his left coat sleeve. Penciled on the white shirt cuff beneath were the words, Hurstmere, Langley Road, Dover. Oh, I apologize, said Anthony. And I retire worsted. He joined Superintendent Battle. You look very pensive, Battle, he remarked. I've got a lot to think about, Mr. Cade. Yes, I expect you have. Things are things aren't dovetailing. They're not dovetailing at all. It's very trying, sympathized Anthony. Never mind, Battle. If the worst comes to the worst, you can always arrest me. You've got my guilty footprints to fall back upon, remember? The superintendent did not smile. Got any enemies here that you don't know, Mr. Cade? He asked. I've an idea that the third footman doesn't like me, replied Anthony lightly. He does his best to forget to hand me the choicest vegetables. Why? Been getting anonymous letters, said Superintendent Battle. Or rather, an anonymous letter, I should say. About me? Without answer, Battle took a folded sheet of cheap notepaper from his pocket and handed it to Anthony. Scrawled on it in an illiterate handwriting were the words, "Look out for Mr. Cade. He isn't what he seems." Anthony handed it back with a light laugh. That all? Cheer up, Battle. I'm really a king in disguise, you know. He went into the house, whistling lightly as he walked along, but as he entered his bedroom and shut the door behind him, his face changed. It grew set and stern. He sat down on the edge of the bed and stared moodily at the floor. Things are getting serious, said Anthony to himself. Something must be done about it. It's all damned awkward. He sat there for a minute or two, then strolled to the window. For a moment or two he stood looking out aimlessly, and then his eyes became suddenly focused on a certain point, and his face lightened. Of course, he said. The rose garden. That's it. The rose garden. He hurried downstairs again and out into the garden by a side door. He approached the rose garden by a circuitous route. It had a little gate at either end. He entered by the far one and walked up to the sundial, which was on a raised hillock in the exact center of the garden. Just as Anthony reached it, he stopped dead and stared at another occupant of the rose garden who seemed equally surprised to see him. I didn't know you were interested in roses, Mr. Fish, said Anthony gently. Sir, said Mr. Fish, I am considerably interested in roses. They looked at each other warily, as antagonists seek to measure their opponent's strength. So am I, said Anthony. Is that so? In fact, I dote upon roses, said Anthony airily. A very slight smile hovered upon Mr. Fish's lips, and at the same time Anthony also smiled. Tension seemed to relax. Look at this beauty now, said Mr. Fish, stooping to point out a particularly fine bloom. Madame Mabel Châtenay, I presume it to be. Yes, I am right. This white rose, before the war, was known as Frau Karl Drusky. They have, I believe, renamed it. Oversensitive, perhaps, but truly patriotic. The La France is always popular. Do you care for red roses at all, Mr. Cade? A bright scarlet rose now. Mr. Fish's slow, drawling voice was interrupted. Bundle was leaning out of a first-floor window. Care for a spin to town, Mr. Fish? I'm just off. Thank you, Lady Eileen, but I'm very happy here. Sure you won't change your mind, Mr. Cade? Anthony laughed and shook his head. Bundle disappeared. Sleep is more in my line, said Anthony with a wide yawn. A good afternoon nap. He took out a cigarette. You haven't got a match, have you? Mr. Fish handed him a matchbook. Anthony helped himself and handed back the box with a word of thanks. Roses, said Anthony, are all very well, but I don't feel particularly horticulture this afternoon. With a disarming smile, he nodded cheerfully. A thundering noise sounded from just outside the house. Pretty powerful engines she's got in that car of hers, remarked Anthony. There, off she goes. They had a view of the car speeding down the long drive. Anthony yawned again and strolled towards the house. He passed in through the door. Once inside, he seemed as though changed to quicksilver. He raced across the house, out through one of the windows on the farthest side and across the park. Bundle, he knew, had to make a big detour by the lodge gates and through the village. He ran desperately. It was a race against time. He reached the park wall just as he heard the car outside. He swung himself up and dropped into the road. "Hi!" cried Anthony. In her astonishment, Bundle swerved half across the road. She managed to pull up without incident. Anthony ran off to the car, opened the door, and jumped in beside Bundle. "I'm coming to London with you. I meant to all along." "Extraordinary person," said Bundle. "What's that you've got in your hand?" "Only a match," said Anthony. He regarded it thoughtfully. It was pink with a yellow head. He threw away his unlighted cigarette and put the match carefully in his pocket. Oh, we are at the end of the chapter. Well then. So, no, not tomorrow, sorry. Sunday we'll get to find out what is up with the match. Let me get Maestro back up here. There we go. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me for story time and listening in. And let us find somebody to raid. If you have any ideas, please let me know. And I will take a look at two of our friends that are streaming right now. There we go. Oh, Allie Mac is streaming right now. And we have a lot of friends. Oh, Polly Swags is on. We could raid him. I haven't raided Swags in a while, so yeah, let's do that. I feel like he's being neglected. Alrighty. Oops, wrong one. Alright. Thank you again for hanging out with me. We will finish the book on Sunday, and then we're going to figure out what to read afterwards. Just getting the raid message ready to go. All right. I hope to see you next time. If I don't, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. If I do, I still hope you have a wonderful weekend. Bye.